Welcome to the Mission Driven Podcast, a show designed to empower, educate, and encourage you to stay focused and committed to your mission. I'm your host, AC Cristales. Let's get ready to roll. Thank you so much for joining me on Mission Driven with AC Cristales. For today's episode, I have a special guest. In fact, she was my first guest, and I'm glad to have her back in the house. So I guess she has moved into family status. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce to you all Rachael Brown. How's it going?
Good. Glad to be back. Glad to be back. Part of the La Familia.
Yeah, part of, see, she even got that Spanish going, La Familia. Yeah, for sure. So obviously, we last talked was in September. Obviously
October.
We talked on, the podcast. Obviously we've connected, ever since, then, but a lot has changed.
Gosh.
A lot has changed. 2020.
Imagine that.
2020, and, just school changed and the world changed and society's changing and everything that's going on. So that's really for you all who are listening to this podcast right now. I know it's been a couple of weeks since I've been on a podcast and done one. But today's discussion, we just want to talk about just the race, issues going on in the United States and really in the world, and how we as educators can do our part, because we are leaders, and although we don't have the political power, we don't have the end all that makes the rules and regulations, we still can make an impact in our community, in our classrooms, in our schools. And so I have this great educator, like I said, Rachael Brown with me, who's a leader at her school. She does staff development, so she's out there in the trenches doing the work for the kids. And so just want to talk and how we can, like I said, as educators, just provide help for our students, because whenever we go back, and we don't even know how that's going to look in the 2020-2021 school year, it's going to be a lot different. And especially with social media now, we know that our students are not oblivious to what's going on in society. So not only are we going through a pandemic, we're dealing with just the racial injustices that I can say it's not like it's nothing new, it's just more out there now. And so, like I said, that's what we want to talk about. And so I'm going to go ahead and let Rachael just, get us started and kind of discuss, because yesterday she was actually in a virtual town hall, talking about race. And so I want to just hear her experiences, and we'll go from there. So this is really nothing like where it's formal questions like the first interview. This time we're just going to go, and we're going to hope that the knowledge and the wisdom that we share with you guys will be impactful and helpful on your journey as an educator, as a parent, as a community member. All right, so go ahead and get started. Let us know about yesterday. How was that?
So it was good. Well, let me just say, first off, from October, the last time that we recorded, to now, I have said, in this pandemic, that educators, we have needed to be included in that essential workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we weren't mandated to go out, we still had a job, and our job changed drastically when we got shut down. And so we have teachers specifically have been that essential worker moving into this race work and equity work, diversity and inclusion work, whatever you want to call it, the getting better together for our students of color work. We are also going to be essential. And so making sure that we are in the forefront of this discussion for our kids, for our colleagues, for each other is hugely important for me. And so, two of our African American, or two educational organizations. One is African American Alliance of Black School Educators. The other one being the Garland Alliance of Latino Administrators, came together yesterday for a town hall meeting that was virtual, and I was honored to be asked to be part of the panel discussion, and just to make my voice heard along with these other great educators was phenomenal. But what we started out talking about were some experiences that we had specifically around implicit bias as leaders and teachers and a student. There was a student included on the panel also, which was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Getting our experiences out there is one piece of it, so that people can really see what it looks like from our lens, because it has been, a tale of two worlds, kind of, sort of,
sure,
for people of color, especially in leadership roles, and those not, the white Americans who haven't had that experience. But we moved past that, because that's one thing, is getting the information out there. But the second piece was, what action steps
Definitely.
Do we recommend this action step? Some of the voices of our white educators that were there were included also, because of course they're an important piece to this. So action steps, specific conversations with questions that we asked, questions that we posed, questions that we're trying to answer, and moving forward. Was the second piece of it. The other group of people that were included in this conversation that were extremely important are elected officials. So there were several elected officials that were part of it on the local level. Because, like you said, in our classroom, so to speak, we don't affect the policy as it's written.
Yep.
But we have seen and we see now that by vocalizing what's going on and what we want, and talking with those policymakers, that we can really affect a lot of things, and start trying to kind of close the gap. Like I used the example yesterday, the teacher or the administrator on the campus level, you have control over your programs. You have control over how you discipline your kids, how you talk to your kids. Policymakers are making the overarching policies that then kind of, color what we're doing at the local level. If we can get those two to kind of come together, then we can make some really good changes for kids.
Exactly.
For, these outcomes with these students. So
definitely. So I think what the main purpose with that is just awareness, right? So when you talk about cultural competency, it's one of the things that I discussed last week. I was doing a training for Region 15 out in San Angelo, and we talked about that, cultural competency. And what does that mean? It means being culturally aware, right? Understanding that you're aware of your culture, you're aware of your norms, your beliefs, your biases, your stereotypes, all that, right? Because that's part of how you've been raised, but you're also culturally sensitive. And in that regards, you're understanding and you have knowledge that maybe the student in your classroom or maybe the individual who's next to you at the supermarket or wherever is not like you. So you take that awareness, you take that knowledge, and then there has to be some sensitivity there. And that's what it means to be culturally competent. But it all starts with awareness. And so that's what it seems like these talks, have been doing, right? And so I have to say this, right? So I was kind of debating, not debating whether to do this podcast. I want to do this podcast, but I also know there's so much information on there, right? So it's kind of like, sometimes I think, well, what else am I going to add to it, right? But I'm glad I did it. I actually have a buddy of mine who lives out in Idaho. He does work out there at the university in Idaho, working with like college enrollment and stuff. And so he was like, man, he's like, I love your podcast. He's like, you should do something on, race. And I was like, all right, you know what? So, that kind of gave me the confidence to go ahead and do something. And not that I don't work on that, because as soon as I was like, all right, you know what? I'm going to get Rachael on this. We can talk, because not only do I want your perspective as an African American, I want your perspective as a female as well, right? Because in sociology, there's, they talk about, conflict theory. So let me just real quick talk about conflict theory. So in conflict theory, it says traditionally what you have your proletariats and your bourgeoisie, right? And so these big words. So anyways, all it means is like you have the people who are in power and the people who are disenfranchised and not in power. And so traditionally in the United States, and this is what I tell my students, traditionally in the United States, the race in power has been white Americans. The gender in power has been males, right? And so when you look at that, you already have two strikes, right? Because you're a woman and you're African American. And so that's why I wanted you on here, but it's good, So that's what we're going to talk about, again, the awareness and being aware and what we can do, because we can do something. So let me start off by just saying this. I sent you this, as we were preparing for this podcast, but what do you think? Why do you think? Or what do you believe is a hard part of talking about race or racism?
Wow. So it kind of goes back to when you were talking about that cultural competency, right? And I mentioned a few minutes ago about living in two different worlds. Traditionally, the people not in power, Black, brown people, and the women, and actually I'm just going to speak from color right now, from race right now. Black and brown people have taken it upon ourselves to understand the culture of the dominant race, right? I will say that for me personally, it was a survival mechanism, which, way back, Jim Crow, Reconstruction, slavery, assimilating into the major culture.
Exactly.
Was a survival tactic for Black people, specifically in America. If you looked closer to being white, if you acted closer to being white, acted closer in air quotes to being white, if you got educated as closely as possible with white folks, you could be accepted, and that equaled survival.
Yeah.
Okay. Like we were talking life and death back then,
Sure.
not so much for me, but I'm an African-American woman. Like I am descended from slaves and slave masters. And that has been ingrained in my hair, my culture, my learning, whether it was conscious or unconscious. Right. So for me, that cultural competency piece was me always knowing what the majority culture was, the dominant culture, and also understanding where I came from, but understanding where I came from in terms of protecting myself and my family, so that I could survive.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And that's more of in a professional sense. And so now coming into it, I feel like I've gotten like a little bit of a new awakening, because enough is enough.
Yeah.
We've been trying to, in our own way, deal with this thing, make it better. But I was trying to do it in a silo. Cannot happen in a silo. No matter how much I know, how much I work to be part of that dominant culture, there was always something there that didn't let me fully get into that dominant culture. There was always somebody questioning. I mentioned this last night, questioning my decisions as an administrator. There was always a teacher. I had a situation, I think I talked about this before, in 7th grade. My 7th grade English teacher said he wasn't going to recommend me.
No, that's
my
right.
8th grade.
You did.
Yeah, my 8th grade
did.
English teacher said he wasn't going to recommend me for Spanish and honors English because he didn't think I could handle it. Now, did he say it was because I was black? No. But it was there, and so now getting all of those experiences out, taking those experiences, but also trying to educate the dominant culture a little bit about our experiences so that they can then start working on their end to make, to bridge that gap is kind of it's kind of my focus now. Like I need to be more vocal about it.
For sure.
I've always been in this work, but I haven't been as vocal about it. I haven't been as connected as I wanted to be to, Black and brown leaders, because I was like, hey, I need to work in this sector, in this area in order to be successful. It's not where it's at.
Yeah.
I will say, though, something that has benefited me from working with, in predominantly white education, campuses and districts, and growing up in a predominantly white district. And I have some skills and knowledge of both sides. Yeah. That I think now will help. So one of the things we talked about last night too is making sure that when you're in that room, whatever the makeup of that room is, that you know your stuff.
Okay.
This goes to teachers too.
Yeah.
One of the things about finding a great teacher is you want them to be strong in their content knowledge, right? You want your leaders to understand policy. You want your leaders to understand the, educational laws, and you also want them to understand cultural competencies and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's what I would definitely say for us is to continue to learn. Be the strongest that you can be in your knowledge base so that when things start to happen, you are not only well equipped intellectually to address that, you don't let the emotions take over.
Okay.
And that sometimes has been, the hard thing about, Black woman, that angry Black woman, like when something comes up, I'm speaking you tend to get angry about it. And you're like, why aren't they hearing me? So then when you're trying to get them to hear you, then all they're hearing is the angry part of it. So I've learned, and, a lot of times some of my, my feedback has always been, you're even killed. You don't let things get to you. That I've trained myself to do that because I got more from coming at people with facts and knowledge than with that emotion. Now, I will also say that those emotions have to be part of the equation because people have to understand where those emotions come from. Again, historically speaking, anytime we have tried, and you've seen this argument on social media, well, you didn't want a silent protest, and now you have a real protest where things are getting burnt down or people are yelling and that kind of stuff, and neither one of those is okay. No, those are both okay. Exactly. In terms of trying to get us heard, but we also have to then come back and be ready to work, and we have to have people in places that can get that work done.
Yeah, I like that part what you just said here. So you can protest and do that, but at the end of the day, what are you going to do? It's going to make a difference. I was actually talking to our buddy, Officer Carter,
Yes.
we were having this conversation because, I'm sure it's got to be tough for him because he's a police officer. So he's on that end, but he's also an African-American man, you know what I'm saying? So, but we were talking about, well, I specifically told him, like, you know what? I get people posting stuff on social media. I understand that. But at the end of the day, the biggest change is in what you do in your day-to-day interactions with people.
Yep.
So for the teachers out there, it's all cute and dandy, putting all these, posts and stuff. But at the end of the day, what's going to be important is how you deal with that African-American kid, when he comes back or she comes back in September or October, or whenever we go back, or the Hispanic kid
Yeah.
who gets on your nerves, who's working your nerves, who's not listening, who doesn't have what you have, Rachel. You talked about you trained yourself, right? And that came with the parenting that you had, that came with the type of schools that you were in. A lot of the students that we deal with, we're low income schools, right? 90%, free or reduced lunch and all that. And so they don't have those skills, and so that's called cultural capital, right? That's the skills needed to be successful in this society. So, the way you talk, the way you dress, all that. And I get, sometimes people are like, well, does it mean I'm fake? No, it doesn't mean you're fake. It's just you understand what needs to be done in order to survive. So you want to be successful in corporate America? Well, you have to dress a certain way. You have to talk a certain way. There's a certain level of education that you have to achieve. Now, you want to be successful in the streets? Okay, there's a certain knowledge that you need for that. Yeah. And so I think it's so, internally reflecting that's going to benefit you when our kids, our babies, right? How we have all these, nicknames we have for our kids, right? Our students come back in the fall, you know? And so another thing I wanted to touch on that you talked about at the beginning, the implicit bias, right? That, okay, well, am I doing it? I'm doing it, but am I really doing it? And so that kind of goes with your eighth grade teacher, right? It's kind of like, well, I don't really think you can do it. Well, why?
Why?
Because he had that implicit bias, right? So talk to us a little bit more about that, about how, teachers can combat that, because I think it's important for them to combat that, for them to realize, man, is there a bias that I have?
Yeah.
I know I say I love black people and it's on my Facebook,
Amen.
So
Black Lives Matter. I got the shirt. Hashtag.
How can I really say that, so talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So for me, the first part, and you touched on it a little bit too, is really talking to people. Really, and we touched on it again last night. I've touched on it with other conversations that I've had. We all had conversations with our friends and educators. Vulnerability is going to be huge during this conversation for both groups of people, the oppressed group and the dominant group, because we're all putting ourselves out there. And so having a teacher who is willing to be vulnerable, stop and think about things, again, kind of work on those emotions. Those emotions are going to be there. We know that they're going to be there, but working through those before you, and I'm speaking from a teacher perspective, before you put that kid out, before you write that referral that has some of this language in it that we all know what it means.
Exactly.
Before you even address the kid in that classroom, thinking about, okay, Johnny has been doing this. Have I talked to Johnny about what is behind all of this behavior? Because we know that there's trauma. We know that all of that stuff plays a part.
There's always a root cause.
Always. And then based on that knowledge that the teacher has of Johnny, then can I make the best decision? Okay. And is that decision really, really based on what Johnny, who is the 12-year-old 7th grade child in front of me, needs, or is it based on what is making me comfortable as that 30-year-old, possibly white female teacher, but that comes from conversations with Johnny, conversations with Johnny's family, okay, which may not be a mom and a dad. It may be a grandmother or aunt, uncle, a former, sibling. Conversations with your administration, which, we've talked about too, making sure that you have administration that's culturally competent.
Yeah, for sure.
To have these conversations. Two, though, those are some steps that need to be done before Johnny has the behavior in your class. As soon as you get that roster, looking at all of your kids, look at the demographics. Okay. We need to see, the brownness of our children or, that kind of thing, that this colorblind thing needs to go away.
Yeah.
You have to see them, in terms of who they are. But then taking it a step further, doing some research, reaching out as soon as possible. And this is one of those implicit biases that I know that you and I have both heard.
Yeah.
One of my schools that I used to work at, we did home visits. The principal there, he actually got a school bus to go around in July. So that all the teachers could take a tour of where the kids live, meet. Everybody had their stuff on. Hey, I don't know if I'm going to be your teacher yet, but you're coming to middle school.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I have had white educators and even some black educators. I'll be honest with you. I have had educators who are scared to go to these different places because is it safe? Am I going to be okay? Is somebody going to try to harm me? That's all about you. And those are valid facts. You don't want to ever put yourself in harm's way. Yeah. But that shouldn't be the reason. That shouldn't stop you from then saying, hey, Miss Brown or Officer Carter. Because I have strong feelings about this whole police being out of schools too. But we might get to that. But hey, Miss Brown or Officer Carter or Officer so-and-so or Counselor so-and-so. Yeah. I really want to connect with this child. I really think that the best thing for this child would be for me to go to their house and meet their parents. I'm having a hard time getting with them. What do you think the best course of action is? Yeah. Then we can talk about, hey, because some of us who have social services backgrounds and sociology backgrounds and stuff know how you need to present yourself when you go into neighborhoods where it's mostly brown or poor or whatever, so that we can then be a support for that. Hey, don't go by yourself. We go during this time. You have on school paraphernalia along with your ID badge. You try to call beforehand to let them know that you're coming. All of these things that are just good mannered. Like you wouldn't show up at somebody's house in Highland Park without letting them know either, right?
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
That kind of stuff. So having that teacher who's willing to say, I want to do this, but I'm not sure how. Can you help me? That's a big part of it. And that's that vulnerability and wanting to ask questions. That helps build that relationship.
That's good. I like that vulnerability piece because that, to me, when I think of vulnerability, I think, okay, man, I'm willing to, I don't know if I want to use expose, but I'm willing to share. I'm willing to display, right, this certain area of my life to somebody and not really knowing how they're going to take it. That's vulnerability, right? I'm willing to show and say, man, I don't really know much about black people or Hispanic people or Asian people or whatever. And I didn't grow up that way, right? I didn't grow up poor. I had mom and dad present in my house. I had, I took trips, out of the country, and it wasn't to visit my grandma in Mexico. I took these trips and I have all these experiences and I've been privileged. And so my vulnerability is how can I understand that which I've never, been a part of it. But that's where it starts. Yeah. It starts with being open. It starts with saying, you know what, hey, I don't understand that, but I'm willing to understand that.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so I want to share this example. I'm glad I'm getting a chance to share this example. So I actually took it from Avid. Okay. So this isn't my activity, but do you remember what's that strand? The cultural strand?
Culturally relevant teaching.
Culturally relevant teaching. That's an awesome strand, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see if you remember this. So remember, I don't know if they did it in your when you took the strand, but remember when they said they grouped you into groups of 4 or 5, and you had to write stereotypes about black people, white people, and all that, right?
Yes.
And so, I do that with my students. So that's my when we because we covered race. That's chapter 11, and so it's the second to last chapter of the semester. So we've kind of worked our way up to that, right? Because you can't start that the first week. You got to build that trust and stuff.
People be running.
Yeah, you got to build that trust. And so that's the second to last chapter, in my sociology class. But I took that activity. I'm like, man, I want to do it. I want to do it with these 18, 19-year-old kids. And so I did it one semester. I mean, I've done it all semester, but here's the example. I did it one semester. And it was random, count from 1 through 5. And so every ones go here, all the 2s go here, all that, right? So it was random. Well, it just so happened that the group that was in charge of, writing stereotypes about African Americans were all white. And I didn't plan it that way because it was a random.
Okay.
And so I'll never forget this kid. His name's Kingsley Lawson. Kingsley Lawson, great kid, African American kid. He was like, Mr. Cristales, why are they so quiet over there? Because everybody else is talking, right? Everybody else is talking and sharing,
Yeah.
because I've created that environment. And, and this is another thing for educators. You create that environment, that culture where you say, hey, you guys be respectful, be honest. And just because somebody says something about a specific group, that doesn't mean that they believe it. I'm saying, I just want to know what you've heard. And don't be pretending like you haven't heard, because let's be honest, let's have this conversation, but we're going to do it in a respectful manner.
Yeah.
And so when you created that culture, once you get to that chapter, once you get 10 weeks in, you already know that we have a family culture, right? So nothing's going to be disrespectful. And if there is, that's when you as an educator, as a professional, step in and, calm that situation down. But I'm proud to say that in the 4 years that I've been teaching sociology, I've never had anything ugly like that.
Right.
But I did have this example where that group was quiet. And you know what happened? This was so beautiful, is that Kingsley stood up, the student, and said, hey guys, it's okay, because I've heard everything.
Right.
And he's like, and then it's all good. And,
Yep.
and you know what he said? And this is such a powerful teaching moment.
Yeah.
He said, if we don't have these conversations, things are never getting better. This is a student. This isn't me. This isn't the professor. This is a student saying that. I was like, man, it's one of the best classroom experiences I've had. And so it's important. It's important to have those conversations. Like I said, I think, from the very beginning, obviously you have to create that environment. You just can't go in day one. And how do you feel about this? But I think students will see that, right? They'll see like, man, this person cares, right? He's willing to have this conversation, or she's willing to have this conversation, or she sees, because kids notice everything, right?
Oh, yeah.
So they'll see how you talk to that group of students. They'll see how you talk to the white students. They'll see how you talk to the Latino students. And if they see that your words aren't matching to your actions, then you lose credibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. Yeah, we've both seen that. I mean, we're, because me and you are both middle school, like hardcore. And middle school kids, if you don't show them, it's not happening. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Good, bad, or in between. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and that's what I was going to say, with that activity. Yes, I did do it in culturally relevant teaching. I did do it at the campus when I was a principal, too. And it was always interesting that Black folks, Latino people, even homosexual, if you put them, put that in there too, always know what we get called. Like we know all the, like you said, like Kingsley said, we've heard them all.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
We've heard it. But white people, generally, there was always something that would end up on their sheet that was a surprise to them.
Okay.
Because like I've said before, they just don't hear it as often. I mean, they may have gotten called some derogatory name, maybe once, maybe, and maybe not. Yeah. That's just not part of the schema that they have. So this is part of me living in those two worlds. We know both sides. Yeah. We know what we get called over here. Yeah. We know what people have called them and what, all of that kind of stuff. But the white students in your class that day, they probably knew all of the African-American stereotypes, the Black stereotypes, but they didn't want to offend anybody. Or
that's what it was.
That's number one. Yeah. Or they didn't want to be possibly, and I'm using air quotes again, exposed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
Because they've heard these things before, or they had somebody in their family call somebody something, or they, that kind of stuff. The other piece of that is some of your white students might not have actually known that some of the things that they heard were derogatory or stereotypical.
Yeah.
Because it's just how it is. Yeah. So some of them might have truly been struggling. Yeah. Like, well, I don't know. Isn't this true? You know what I'm saying? Exactly. That kind of thing.
Exactly.
So that, again, that's part of that vulnerability. And I'm glad that Kingsley stood up and was vulnerable. And hopefully that helped the conversation in that group of white students. And then hopefully it helped the conversation overall.
It did. I mean, it's one of those things where like that's the chapter. So my last 3 chapters that I cover are social class, right? Because that's important. You low income, high income, middle class, all that, race, and then gender and sexuality. So we're hitting some of the real topics in society right now. We hit those at the end, and you create, like I said, I keep repeating this, but it's so important. You create that environment. So to kind of piggyback off that activity, one of the things that I told the students, I'm like, look. Because it's funny, you said, maybe some of the white students didn't know what they were called or whatever. So I remember, because then I put it on the board. I posted on the board. So they're seated at a table, and they're working in groups and they're coming up with their list. And then I'm like, all right, I want you to pick the top 10 that I'm going to put, on the whiteboard or whatever. And so for one of the white ones, it was like eats at Spring Creek Barbecue.
Right.
And I was like, and I looked at her. I said, girl, I eat at Spring Creek Barbecue, you know? But that's great, because then it's like, and then I give them this example. I said, you know what's crazy, guys? I said, let's do this. I said, because, you know, for African Americans, they'll put sports, athletes, all that stuff. I said, well, for Asians, why didn't y'all put good at football? And they just kind of look at me. And for white, why didn't y'all put R&B? And for blacks, why didn't y'all put plays tennis? Yeah. All these things that typically you don't associate with a specific race or ethnicity. I said, because this is ridiculous. What does it mean to be white? What does it mean to be black? What does it mean to be Latino? Right. You know, we're putting each other in boxes.
Amen.
And that's what I'm saying. We're the ones that are putting each other in boxes, because just because you're Latino, you can't play golf, or just because you're white. Right. And check this out. This didn't happen in that specific class. This was in another summer. It was in a summer class. I had this one kid. I can't even remember his name. He was a white kid, real quiet kid. And he's like, I do R&B music. Yeah. And everybody just kind of looked at him. I'm like, yeah, we know what you're thinking. You're thinking he should have been doing something like country and stuff. And he's like, no, I love R&B. Yeah. Because there it is again. You know, our biases, right? We don't associate white, you know, kids or white boys with R&B, even though, you know, John B, right? Yeah. But we don't associate that. But yeah, it's so important to have those activities, but then follow up and share as an educator your experience. Because I say, guys, are there some truth to this? Mm-hmm. Are there some truth to these stereotypes? You know, because for Hispanics, they put more beer at a kid's party than Capri Suns. Right. Are there some truths to that? Yeah. But does that mean that's who you are? Mm-hmm. Does that mean that's what you have to do?
Does that mean that every single person, that's, you know, where that stereotype is. It's not every single person, you know? And so it's funny that you said, you know, that the white kid in your class was like, I like R&B.
No, so, and he did R&B music.
I mean, he did it. So he was like in it.
He was in it, like doing an album and all that.
That's greatness. Yeah. And so, you know, in the pandemic, just like everybody, I've been watching more TV, and I have found some great shows. So one of the shows that I'm currently watching right now is American Soul. Okay. It's on BET. It's basically the story of Soul Train and Don Cornelius, cool. And it's phenomenal. So it's in season 2 right now. There was an episode that I just watched where there was a scene where Don Cornelius and his like money guy are trying to get advertising from one of the execs at Ford or Chrysler. Who makes Cadillac? Who makes Cadillac? GM. Okay. Trying to get advertising with this high exec, right? That Don Cornelius notices out the window, because they're at this man's house, that his white children are outside doing the dances that they're doing on Soul Train. Like, he can just tell, like, they're doing all the different things and, you know, that kind of stuff. I don't know if he could hear the music or not, but he sees this man's white children. The white exec says to him, white kids don't watch Soul Train, because Cornelius said that. He said, you know, everybody's watching. He was like, you know, he was talking about how black people buy their Cadillacs and we don't need to advertise because black folks buy our Cadillacs, right? Don Cornelius was like, but you can get so much more by advertising. Wouldn't it be great to know that you can get more black people and white people? He said, white kids are watching our show. The exec says, no, they're not. And he calls his son in there from outside and puts his son on the spot and says, you don't watch Soul Train, do you? And you can see the look on his white child's face, because yes, he did watch Soul Train and he was outside actually practicing the stuff. No, Dad. No. Wow. And so going back to our piece about some of those white students might have been so just overtaken with the possibility that their white family or something might find out that they've held that kind of stuff in. Like, I don't know if your student who was in R&B, if his family knew that. Yeah. I don't know if they were supportive. I mean, it doesn't really matter. But it was also that piece that the dominant culture, which in America has been white, you know, descendant from European culture, has always just downgraded that even white folks can't be part of it and have tried to keep them out. But that was a powerful scene, because that kid, and like you said, kids, like, we need to be, our kids are where it's at. Like, they're going to be the ones who save us. That kid was so, overtaken by what his dad would have said had he said, yes, I watch Soul Train. Me and my friends are watching it every day. That he said, no, Dad, I don't do it. Then when Don Cornelius and them left, the kid went around the back and asked Don Cornelius for his autograph.
Oh, really?
Where his dad couldn't see him.
Oh, okay.
Because he was like, I love your show. Like, can I have your autograph? Yeah. You know? And so it's making sure that we're empowering our kids to have these conversations with their parents, their family, their teachers who are not in the same frame of mind.
Yeah.
And not being embarrassed by it.
Exactly.
You know, because there's been times when I, as an African American, have, you know, liked things that were supposedly not black.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would be lying to you if as a younger person, I didn't talk about it, or if somebody asked me, I'd be like, no, I don't listen to so-and-so. No, and I do. And like now my playlist is, you know, Dolly Parton to, you know, Meg the Stallion. I got everything in between. But there's that piece too, that socialization, that not wanting to be ostracized for what you really like. That's a piece of this too.
But it's that versatility. You know? That's what I tell them. I listen to country. I put on some George Strait right now in class. Man. You know, and it's so great to have these conversations. You know, and it's important. You know, how you said it. It's going to be our kids. You know, they're our future. They're really our present. Mm-hmm. But it's all learned. So if they're not, so obviously from the example that you gave about that kid who liked Soul Train and didn't want to tell his dad, so already he knew in his mind, it's been ingrained. Yep. I shouldn't like anything that has to do with black people.
Exactly. So
that's ingrained. That's taught. He wasn't born that way.
Yep.
Right. And so it's so important to have these conversations, because that's when you, as an educator, and again, I know, you know, this doesn't go with like curriculum and whatever it is that you have to cover for the standards, you know, state standards for assessments and all that. But these are the conversations that are important, because if we don't take care of this, then that's why we're going to have society the way it is.
Oh, yeah.
That's why people are going to hate each other. That's why people are going to, you know, talk disparagingly about other people, other cultures, because they don't have conversations like this. So it's important for us to teach. I know you have your 2 kids, and I'm sure you're teaching them to be respectful of all people, regardless of their color. I'm doing that with my daughter. Yeah. Why? Because it starts with us as parents. Yep. And here's the thing. The reality is, if you're a teacher out there, educator, principal, leader, whatever, youth worker, and you have students or young people that look up to you, and they don't have parents teaching them, you know, the right way. And what I mean by the right way is just being good. Just being good people, man. Yeah. Good, just being good to others. If you don't have that, then hey, that's your part to do what you can. You know, we can only do so much sometimes, because, you know, obviously, you know, parental influence and family influence plays a big role. But man, when we have them for those 8 hours, it's so important that we lead by example. We lead with our actions, you know, and because, I don't care if you're white, black, Hispanic. And then I'm not saying, because I like what you said, I'm not saying I don't see that. I know that. I understand that. But regardless, I still love you, man. Yeah. And, you know, and so when you think about that, I remember, let me give you this quick example. So I'm a Garland ISD, you know, product, right? And when I remember my 8th grade year, I went to Austin Academy. Mm-hmm. And that academy, you know, it only has a specific number of neighborhood kids. And that's the only reason I went, because I lived in the neighborhood. But I was in honors classes. I had honors. I had Algebra 1 as an 8th grader, and I had honors science. And I just remember, I'm like, man, where are my homies at? You know?
Yeah.
I was like, where are my homies at? Like, I'm just here. Like, I'm the only Hispanic. And then they would want the white kids would want me to talk like I was in a Spanish soap opera and say, they're like, hola, ¿cómo estás? You know, they're like, hey, talk like that. Talk like a Spanish, you know, soap opera and stuff. And so I would do that, right? Yeah. No, not knowing that I was the brunt of their joke, right? But but I was just like, where is it at? Because even with that, even with putting kids and challenging them and saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, you can be in honors. I don't care if you're black, but let's be real. It happens. Like, no, it's going to be too hard. Yeah. Isn't that another? I'm opening Pandora's box on that one, right?
Yeah, because you know how I feel. We've talked about this. And so one of the things, you know, the campus that I'm at now is, you know, mostly black and brown children. Mm-hmm. Mostly children who come from a home where English is not the first language. Mm-hmm. Primary language spoken is Spanish for most of our kids. Not all of them, but most of them. And we, out of the middle schools in the district right now, are maybe one of the only who does not have a National Junior Honor Society.
Oh, really?
Does not.
Oh, wow.
There are a couple other programmatic things that are a little bit inequitable mm-hmm. between. And it's not one person's fault. It's like we've talked about. It's that systematic mm-hmm. that over the years has just not been brought up because Not that we tell our kids, or not that our campus has said you can't do it. It's just not what we talk to our kids about usually. But we need to change that. Like we said, we also need to increase our honors numbers at our campus. I'm at my campus specifically. Challenge them. But it's about how we talk to them and how we talk about them and how we talk to them about their future. That's really what is different, has been different over the years in campuses that are predominantly Black and brown children, is the conversations about futures.
I love that, man.
Is different. The road for our kids who look like you and I they've been directed this way. They've been detoured a certain way, whereas kids and campuses where it's mostly white students have been directed a different way. It is what it is, y'all. That's a fact. So now it's time to start thinking about, we need to start making sure that there's equity across all campuses, regardless of demographic, on programs. Those are things that administrators at the district level have to have a handle on, have to say. I don't know, to my knowledge, if anybody's ever asked what happened to it, because evidently there was a National Junior Honor Society and then it just went away.
Okay.
What happened? Why is that okay? That's not okay. Why are your athletic numbers so low? Why are your choir numbers so low that you only require one teacher, whereas other campuses have two teachers? That kind of stuff. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it, though, is looking at our demographics and making decisions that are best for them. So because we have a lot of kids who come from bilingual elementaries, right? They are already working on their biliteracy, where they are fluent in both, predominantly, again, Spanish and English. We might start getting some in Vietnamese because we have the Vietnamese program too, but right now, mostly Spanish. Why then do I only have one Spanish teacher?
That's true.
On my campus, when we know I have kids who are taking Spanish 5 AP. Why do I just have that one teacher where I'm trying to cram all of these classes into her one section of Spanish 4 and 5, and I have to break it down because she can't have 60 kids. But I know for a fact that we probably have 60 kids that could test into Spanish 3, 4, and 5.
For sure.
So it's on both sides.
And get some high school credit.
And get high school credit and start detouring them back to, or give them more options. You know, it shouldn't just be two forks in the road. Like there are 5 or 6 options for them, but there's no reason why I have a kid who's a 5th grader who's been working in Spanish and English and has mastered the Spanish level STAR test in math and or reading.
Which is a lot harder. Spanish STAR is a lot harder.
Man, and then I come to middle school and then I'm talking about putting you in a math lab class. Because English is not, your predominant language. Instead of saying, no, I'm going to keep you in honors math because you mastered it in Spanish. I'm also going to look and see if you can test into a high school class right now. Why are we not doing that at 6th grade? Because at Austin and at all of these other, magnet, not just in Garland, but in other programs, we're teaching geometry to some 6th grade kids. Geometry to some 7th grade kids, which means that they're getting pre-cal by the time that they're... Why are we not doing that with things that will help our kids not only on that track, but also on their future track and help build their cultural competency? Because for so long, Black kids and Hispanic kids, Latinx kids are told you got to assimilate. And part of that, I know from, speaking to my other Spanish-speaking friends, is some of their families that don't learn Spanish.
Which is ridiculous.
But it happened, right?
I've had people. It happens, and
it happened.
It happened, and it happens.
It's so now we have an opportunity with the knowledge that we have to not only help them reclaim that on that front, and if we have kids who are in, Mandarin, Chinese, and Vietnamese, and all of these other languages, Arabic, helping them, but then also say, mainstream is our stream.
For sure.
Everybody belongs in this one pool, and that will make things so much better. We will see academic success if we would just support these kids where they are and get them to where they need to be. So it's gonna be hard conversations though. Because I'm talking about money. I'm talking about I want another Spanish teacher. Honestly, I probably need 3 Spanish teachers on campus. And I want another choir teacher. And I need somebody to do NJHS. All of these things cost money.
For sure.
But, from being a campus principal, if you look at a budget for a school or a school district, where they put their money, that's what they prioritize.
Okay. Yeah.
So if your priority is in athletics, all of your money is going to go to athletics. And you will see that on the budget. You will see that on line items. our budget needs to be focused on academic success and cultural competencies.
Yeah.
And making sure that we're spending money on recruiting and hiring appropriate people, and not just going to HBCUs, not just going to Spanish speaking countries and getting people, but having a questioning and a rubric for the type of people.
I'm glad you said that.
Because I mean, seriously, because we know just every single Black educator, every single Hispanic educator, every single white educator is not good for kids, or not in it.
That's
and
right.
We're not
in it for
all
the right
equal.
reasons. Yeah, for sure.
And so making sure that we're getting the best people in the right places that can help our kids.
Yeah,
needs to be. That's where the money needs to be.
For sure.
And then instruction.
Definitely.
Yeah. So. I don't know, tangent.
No, you're good.
This whole thing, this is what it is,
yeah,
right?
that's what it is. No, but you know what? I want to hit on something that you said, because it's about the conversations about the future. So last week, like I said, I did a virtual keynote, so I was excited about that. But we talked about did one for parents, and one of the things that we talked about are the myths or the lies, right? So here's a myth: like, I can't help my student because I didn't graduate from high school. And most of the time when you're dealing with Latin, parents or Hispanic parents, that's their grade level, right? They didn't go to high school. They didn't even go to middle school. Like my mom, the highest grade she completed was 5th grade. Yeah. And not because, that's all she wanted to do. That's all she could in her country, like they didn't have money. And so it was like, I always tell the students, I'm like, man, you guys get free education, free public education in countries like, Peru or Guatemala, where my dad's from, the same thing. Like, if your parents didn't have money, that was it. 5th grade was it, And so, but there's that myth: I can't help my son or daughter be successful academically because I don't understand the material. I never went to college. And then you have, the statistics that say, okay, well, if your dad or mom are college graduates, then the percentage of you going to college and being successful goes up as well. So we have all these things, right? However, research will show that what's important is, that the parents are involved. Mm-hmm. They communicate with the school, that the parents communicate with their child. And here's what I'm going to focus on, because this is what you said, is that the parents are having conversations about the future and expectations with their kids. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because here's the thing right here. I'm going to give an example about my daughter. It's funny how you said that there are school districts that are putting, kids like in geometry in 6th grade. So my daughter will be in 6th grade next year. Well, last year, she's in a local school district, affluent school district here, in the Dallas area. But last year, they had a meeting for parents and said, hey, do you want your kids to be on a different path for math? And by the time they get into 6th grade, they'll be start doing some geometry. But it's just it's going to fast track them basically, right? And so, heck yeah, we signed up for her. Her mom and I were on board because we know she can do that. Yep. Even if she didn't believe it, Amen. We know. But that's the conversation piece. Sitting down with Isabel and saying, you can do this. Yep. Even during the pandemic, when everything went online, I said, all right, Izzy. I said, I know you're doing your work for school, but I have a 6th grade book, because if you're in 5th grade, you're going to be doing 6th grade. And so I told her this a couple of days ago. I said, I'm going to get a 7th grade book, because I want to challenge you. I want you to know that you're capable of doing that. And those are the conversation pieces that sometimes the reality is that our students, the type of students that we work with, right? And like I said, we work with the low income kids, man. And so those kids, they don't have those conversations. But if those students aren't having those conversations with their parents, and not because the parents don't want to, or maybe sometimes the parents don't want to, but sometimes they don't know how. Yeah. They don't have that education. They don't have that capital, that cultural capital, which has nothing to do with money. Then that's what I believe strongly. That's where we as educators, we fill in those gaps, man. And I don't know, it's very cliche talk about filling the gaps. Now, I'm really filling the gaps. And filling the gaps means having these conversations about the future and saying, you know what, you can do it. Because I know you tell your son he can do it.
I do.
I know you tell your daughter. I tell my daughter.
Absolutely.
And so here it is. Yeah. But what about the babies who don't hear that?
And so fill in the gap. So it is, we need, the Joe Clark and Jaime Escalante, folks to come back. But here's what I will say about that too. We are fortunate because when our schools have meetings, we're able to go, and we make it a priority because we know that that's what's happening. What I would even stretch to say is for schools that have parents who may not be in traditional type 8 to 5-ish jobs, make sure that we're offering these meetings not only at multiple times, but non-traditional times. So one of the things that I did when I was at the middle school here in Garland before I came to Bussey was I had morning meetings for parents. I tried to record meetings at that time. So now we have Zoom and Google Meets. There's no excuse. And make sure that we are offering these times for people to come. And again, I'm going back to my original point. Go talk to these parents and say, we want you to be here, right? Right? Because Jaime Escalante and Joe Clark, they both went to people's houses.
For sure.
They had to because they believed in those kids.
Yeah.
And they knew that they needed mom and dad to believe in them too.
Exactly.
So sometimes it's not that the parents, it's just that the parents don't know how to.
Exactly.
And so that's where we fill in the gap. You know, strong African-American, Latino women administrators have to fill in that gap by not only pulling up the kids, but pulling together the parents too and saying, hey, I'm with your child for 8.5 hours a day. I have seen what they can do. Yeah. We really need you to help us make sure that they're there. Or can you sign this? And can we get you there? We're you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so I take that very, very seriously.
Me too. Yeah, for sure.
You know, I
think as educators, we all have to.
You have to.
And, you know, and even, you know, I'll even say this, and I know you feel the same way. Even if you're a white educator, you know, one of the stories that I always tell in my keynotes, it's how I wrap it up and end it. And I talk about my 5th grade teacher who was a white lady. And yet this white lady, right, you know, if I had the type of attitude that I can't, you know, listen to her because she's white, which some of our students do, they've been trained to think like that. Not only that, they've seen stuff on now because of social media. You know, so that shapes their belief system. Yeah. You know, sometimes it's not even parenting. Sometimes it's kind of like, why do you hate police? Oh, it's because of this. Well, has a police officer ever done this to you? You know, anyways, but but I talk about, you know, Mrs. Judy Purvis and the impact she had, you know, just with her words, you know, and it shaped my future. Like, I have potential, me. Yep. This kid whose father, you know, is in and out of jail. This kid whose father was, you know, physically abusive to his mom. This kid whose father was, you know, a drug addict. I have potential because everybody else is saying that I'm going to be like him. Everybody else is seeing me and saying, you're going to be another gangbanger, another, you know, drug addict. And yet here's a white teacher telling me that I have potential. Man, life changing. And so that's what I would encourage anybody listening to our podcast. Like, man, don't limit a student just because, you know, he or she, you know, is not the same as you, or, you know, didn't grow up the same way. Like, man, all our kids have potential, and it's up to us to plant those seeds of hope, to plant those seeds that they can be successful. It's up to us to be vulnerable. You know, sometimes it takes vulnerability. Absolutely. And just saying, hey, you know what? I don't know, but I'm willing to learn, you know, and maybe, you know, it's tough having these discussions about race, but man, I want to commit myself to learning. I want to commit myself to discussing and doing what I can, right? So I can be a better educator. Yeah. Because if not, you know, things are just going to get worse.
It is. You know, and so like you said, you know, I have, just like you, had phenomenal white educators who have shaped me and did, you know, ultimately I did make it into both honors English and Spanish because somebody saw it in me. And I have, as a teacher and administrator, have seen where some of our children have better relationships with their white educator, teacher, than even me on some things. Because again, you know, we're not the children whisperers all the time. There's gonna be a kid that's like, I can't. For sure. I can't. I know that. We both know that, right? But I also want to encourage white educators to kind of harness that power and try to be more intentional with it now. Because I think for most of them, it was just their love of kids, which is number one. That helped. You know, it may not necessarily be that they completely understood the plight of that child, but they loved that kid. You know, that's step one. Now educate yourself about the bigger picture, because you're going to have more of these children who are coming to you with these issues, and you want to be able to be that person for more than just one. Again, we can't save them all. You know,
you can't. But you can plant that seed.
But you can plant it. And knowing if we have a pipeline of educators, like when I send kids to high schools, I know that at high schools that I have people with relationships with, there are people there that will take that kid under their wing. And I've contacted people. Like we had a kid this year, 8th grader, who was going to be moving to a different district. She told me which high school she was going to. I happen to be friends with the principal at that high school.
Oh, awesome.
So I called her and I said, hey, this baby is literally a diamond. Like she can do this, this, and this. And I asked her, I said, can I send her your picture? She was like, yes, maybe. I talked to her mom. I said, hey, I reached out to the principal. I just want her to have her face before she gets there. Because I had that relationship and I knew what kind of educator was at that next school, could do that for that child. We need to all have those pipelines. I've done that for other students. I had another kid that went to a different district. A white administrator is in this district. I did the same thing. I called her and said, hey, this baby is coming. This is what he needs. Please, I'm going to give his mom your name. When she gets there, get them in contact. If we have those pipelines that include everybody, then the kids will get better and the system will get better, because everybody will end up having somebody, and nobody will get left in the dust or in the cracks. And I too have had white students who I've been able to build trust with. And I've had conversations with some of my white students, especially when I worked in the rural suburban district, that were like, my family, when they talk about Black people, like, you're not the picture that I get.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? And thank you for talking to me. Thank you for doing this. And that was when I was a high school administrator. Yeah. So having those conversations with everybody is huge. Because like I said, I'm a kid person. I can pretty much talk to kids from 2 to 18 and we're going to have something. And I happen to be an African-American woman. There might be, and I have a very good friend who's a high school teacher who's got freckles and red hair. She's just as phenomenal. Even I think she's better sometimes with the kids when I've seen her. And she's armed herself with knowledge and data, but she also loves kids, and she takes that into her classroom every single day. And so it's not just one thing. It's not just one voice. It's not just one avenue.
Yeah, so. Definitely. And that's the hope with this episode, with this podcast, that whoever's listening to it, like, man, just understand that you play an important role in doing what you can, as far as having to do with race issues and just doing your part and learning and being intentional. I think I like that. You have to be intentional. The journey, it's worth it.
Absolutely.
The journey to be intentional, the journey to find and be that positive light is worth it, and that's, to me, it's what makes education great, that regardless of the type of students, because we can't always choose them. We can't, we can't choose the things that they come with, the situations, and we know how heartbreaking some of the stuff is that we've heard, recently, right? Recently, and some of the things that even through this pandemic, like there's students who, I guarantee you they're missing meals. I guarantee you they're missing that social support. And yet, on the other spectrum, you have kids who, man, they're living it up and having a good time because their parents have the ability to provide them that lifestyle. And so, don't be foolish in thinking that every child is having the same experience, because they're not. Be knowledgeable, be intentional about it, and do your part to support them. Absolutely. And I think that's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
So before we wrap up, you got anything else to say? I love this conversation.
I know.
This is
like
great.
This is part one.
This is going to be part one. I was thinking that too. I was thinking about that too.
We need to have a series and bring in some more voices. Because I do want to talk about eventually the police aspect and police in schools and discipline.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a whole bunch of it. But for right now,
it's a good. It's a good starter.
Yeah,
so it'll be part one. We'll do it again. Yeah, for sure.
We've whet the appetite.
Yeah.
But for right now, for my educators who might be listening, as you are getting ready to go back into the classroom, getting ready for next school year. We know that there's going to be kids that need to be educated, and what form that is, we still don't know. I encourage you to be intentional and think about the kids who are going to be in front of you. Even if you don't have a roster right now, the demographics of your school. That there is a 99% chance that you're going to have a child of color or something like that in your class, depending on where you are.
Yeah, depending on where you're at, yeah.
Just start arming yourself with knowledge.
Definitely.
Refocus on your beliefs and your values, and start looking at how you run your classroom. that letter that you send out at the beginning of the year, is there a letter? Number one, but that first communication with parents, that first communication with kids, how you greet kids when they come in, the language that you are planning on using when addressing the kids. Those are things you can all start looking at now. There's tons of research out there. There's tons of articles out there. So I encourage you guys.
Maybe, you know what, we can bring something. I'm sorry to cut you off, but maybe we can bring something, in the next coming weeks about, hey, this is how you can prepare yourself for the first days of school. Because that's the most important part.
Absolutely.
How you start.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it really is. So just start thinking about that. The internal work is probably the hardest work.
Yep.
And so that's where we're at right now. But thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you.
This
As
was
always,
good.
I loved it. Yeah, for sure. And thank you all for listening to Mission Driven with AC Cristalis. Again, I hope you were able to take some valuable information from this. We'll be back. Definitely. This is definitely part 1. So we'll be definitely back for part 2. Wish you guys a great, great, great day or night whenever you're listening to this podcast. And as always, faith, hope, love.